Greetings, and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello to you. Now, I'm not sure if that's to you with two O's or one, but we'll go with it today because I guess I'll sort of carry on the introduction here. We are talking about a song which has a bit of a weird title. It's George Harrison's Love You Too, but not Love You Too. It's definitely Love You Too, not Love You Too.
Good. Well, that's certainly clarified absolutely nothing. Excellent work there. Yeah, also, just before we start, I do want to say Happy New Year. We're recording this on the 3rd of January. It's a brand new year. 2025 can get fucked, and let's hope for something better in 2026.
Well, yeah, but you say that because it's the 3rd of January and there's some horrible things going on in the world on the 3rd of January. So 2026 has had a bit of a shitty start. So there you go. Good stuff. Why don't we talk about love and music and George and adventurism in music and breaking new ground and all of that sort of stuff to take our minds away from the shit show that is the world at large.
That sounds like an excellent idea. Well, let's just start at the beginning then. Love you to what?
Well, kudos to George here. Within sort of the context of Revolver, George gets so much more attention on this album than he's had before. We're what was this? Track four?
Track four.
Track three.
Track four.
Track four. 50% of the album so far is George. I mean, bear in mind that this is widely regarded as being one of the greatest albums of all time. To get this far in, if you like, and for George to be the dominant figure in it is quite an achievement. So brilliant effort. And also for this to be so different from his other two offerings on the album as well says an awful lot for the little boy who's grown up and developed enormously in terms of his songwriting ability and also in terms of his influences as well. Because, hey, folks, this bit we talk about India.
Yeah.
Because we know so much about the subject.
Yeah, I think it is worth pointing out at this point that we are two middle-aged white blokes, and so at a certain point, we have to confess that we aren't necessarily always perfectly going to be the people to discuss certain elements around this, particularly when it comes to things like Indian classical music. However, there's nothing we can do about that, so we will simply attempt to be as accurate and as sensitive as we can, whilst fully acknowledging that we are who we are.
It's okay to take an interest, though.
Yeah, of course,
not to pass yourself off as an expert. After all, that's exactly, okay, perhaps to a slightly greater degree, what George himself did.
Are you comparing us to George Harrison's?
No, I'm not. But clearly, from around the time of Help onwards, he was starting to take more of an interest in this side of things. It was something that interested him. In particular, you do not see the other Beatles getting as involved in this style of music. I certainly don't think John Lennon had a particularly high opinion of it. So it's something where you can sort of see him carving his own niche here, and it seemed also to suit some elements of his personality and give him some insight into his own life that perhaps had been missing before. So brilliant. It's fantastic that he's finding something that means something to him. Of course, what I find interesting is the fact that this was written and recorded in April of '66 before he'd even visited India. It's not until later in the year that him and Patty go to India, spend a few weeks there, and he then takes up an offer to be taught the sitar to a much greater extent by Ravi Shankar. Although he meets them in June, again, it's after this has been. I mean, the timeline is really quite interesting. So he's developed this interest in this music, he's put it into practice, and then he's gone and got even more experience, which then comes to fruition on Sergeant Pepper. And then we don't really see it anymore after that as well. It becomes something that is personal to him, that he continues with personally, but not necessarily professionally. So the whole story behind it is really very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. And I think One of the most interesting things about this song is just how kind of far it is developed from kind of the Indian influences that we've seen, on Beatles albums so far. This isn't a song like Norwegian Wood, which I don't mean this to sound disrespectful, but is a relatively straightforward pop song which has a sitar on it. This is not that. This
Yeah.
is a completely separate developmental kind of leap forward. And this is a song which is, 100% being written, recorded, and produced as a piece of Indian music, not as a pop song which happens to have an Indian instrument on it. I think that's hugely significant, and it's absolutely the first time that we've seen anything even remotely like this on a Beatles album. And in a broader cultural sense, again, one has to tread slightly carefully around this, but the thing that everybody says about this song is it's the first time that you really get anything produced in the West like this that isn't just like pastiche, which isn't just like stereotype or being used, like to an extent the way that some Indian music is used in Help, which is as like, sort of like to underscore a comedy scene or something like that. This is a very sincere, very genuine attempt to do something with this style of music that certainly hasn't been seen in the Beatles up till this point, and hasn't really been seen culturally much in the West, at least not in the UK, with this kind of high profile release. So it is I think it's very easy to underestimate, but it is a really, really significant piece of music.
It's the difference between choosing an instrument to complement the song and then creating a song that incorporates that instrumentation as a deliberate stylistic choice.
Hmm.
So I think there is a massive difference there, and that's good. That's what we want, and you can tell that from, I think, as much as anything, the opening and the closing of the song. I mean, this is typically a short song. There's not much going on once you take out the instrumentation, um, but that opening 30 seconds or so is just overwhelmingly exciting and fantastic. And I'll sort of give you an example, that I driving around recently. I put Revolver on in the car, got to a set of traffic lights just as this song came on. Like they're four-way lights, so the north south go at the same time, but the east and west, because of the nature of the road, you have to wait. So you have to wait for quite a while. I had to wait for, it felt, it's a good couple of minutes, and the song came on, and it allowed me the time to properly listen to it in a way. If you're driving along, obviously you're paying attention to everything. Here, all I was looking for was, the change of the lights. So I actually sat and listened to it, and you really forget just how interesting and inventive and exciting the opening of the song is, with that, whether it's improvised or whether it was written, but that instrumentation that builds and builds and builds, and then suddenly the song explodes after about 30 seconds into something that is really different and quite radical from anything the Beatles have, or anyone else had done before. But also, actually, what I thought was quite interesting when then listening to that song really kick into life was, I thought, well, there you go, George. These are exactly the kind of sentiments that you could have used on Taxman, where you're a world-weary 20-something, aware of how easy it is to be used and abused by all around him. Now, admittedly, after that, the lyrics just get a little bit silly. But that first, 30 seconds into the first, then 30 seconds of the song itself, genuinely exciting. And that's a really powerful thing. It's one of the first times I've probably said that about a George song, where you shift from it just being song, and you get it developing into something that has power and excitement behind it. Well, there you go. That's my traffic light story.
Well, that's an excellent traffic light story. Thank you very much for that. It's
And eventually the lights changed.
okay. Thank you. I was going to ask you if there was some kind of denouement, so thank you
No.
for that kind of emotional catharsis. I think it's what everyone was waiting for. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned like the radicalism of this. I think that is a really important thing to emphasize, because I think it's something that's really undersold in this song, that kind of radicalism, and particularly when it comes to Revolver, it's always Tomorrow Never Knows. That's the radical departure. That's the song that everybody talks about in terms of the kind of, but this is, I would argue, as radical, and I think it does really get overlooked for that. And I don't particularly know why, given the vast amount of analysis that this album is subjected to. It does seem to get rather glossed over. Now, I'm going to be again, just to re-emphasize this, I am not in any way, shape, or form going to claim to be an expert about Indian classical music. I do not know much about it. I'm the first to admit that. But I know that this song does sometimes come in for criticisms of sort of Orientalism and stuff like that. I don't think that those are justifiable, not necessarily because of my opinion on it, but I think the fact that Ravi Shankar is prepared to give it a pass means that it's probably okay. I don't think he would just say that in order to pacify his mate. And I think, particularly when we're talking about the radicalism of the song, that is also something which is really worth acknowledging. Ravi Shankar isn't just a name that's attached to the Beatles. In fact, if anything, it's kind of the other way around. He is a world-class master at this instrument, and he thinks that this song is great. So I'm kind of more inclined to take his word for it than, music critics trying to be dreadfully right on about it. But having said that, again, I fully acknowledge that I'm not an expert in this field. But I do think that radicalism is something that is really worth drawing attention to, because there are a lot of radical things on this album. But yeah, for whatever reason, this one tends to get passed by a little bit.
The fact that he was taking interest in it and then continued to take an interest, it's not like Brian or Keith are just sort of sitting down going, right, let's one of us play this on this track because, we think it's trendy. It's
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
genuine interest who then sought out more. And, George had a afterwards a lifelong fascination with elements of the culture, and continued to be involved in lots of these aspects in many ways. I think that's important too. So it's not a case of exploitation, it's a case of genuine interest. If you want to call that appropriation, that's perfectly fine, but I think it's possibly the wrong person to say it to, because he did also give quite a lot back. And your point about the critical appraisal is quite interesting, and I'm sure you'll mention. I know you want to mention McDonald in a minute, but I'm just going to mention Ray Davis of the Kinks' view of this, because it's particularly perplexing and falls under the category of completely missing the point. So he said,
Ray Davis missed the point in something.
I know, he
No.
says, this sort of song I was doing 2 years ago. Not sure you were, Ray. Now I'm doing what the Beatles were doing 2 years ago. Again, it's not a bad song. It's well performed, which is always true of a Beatles track. Well, considering how few Beatles are actually on this track, that's a very interesting statement to make. And maybe it is particularly well played because they had, particularly on the tabla, a specialist come in and play. I know there's apparently some debate over how much George was playing the sitar on this, but
I think that debate has kind of been settled now, though. I think it's pretty much certain that it is actually George.
yeah, I've seen a quote from I can't remember the gentleman's name now, but the guy who came in to play the tableau, who said, "Well, I was there, and believe me, I sat there and I saw George play it, so that's good enough for me." But there are links at this point with the Asian music circle, who are with sort of fairly I wouldn't say prominent, but reasonably well known within certain circles in London at the time. And that's the connection that through which George then, and in fact, George and Paul met Ravi Shankar. Although there's an interesting little anecdote on the film about the Beatles in India, in which at that first meeting, George was quite quiet, but he was very interested. Paul just kind of looked bored. But so it's interesting that the connection is genuine with George, and I think it does come through. I wonder if some people are perhaps a little bit uncertain about the the connection because of the lyrical nature of the song as well, because it's a little bit all over the place. I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's one of those songs where you can tell that George is kind of feeling his way forward with this, and he will have other sort of Indian-based compositions where I think he will be much more confident. Within You Without You is the obvious example, but I think particularly The Inner Light, which I know a lot of that is lyric is quotes rather than stuff that he originated himself, but nevertheless, like you can feel the confidence and the direction, and as always with this stuff, the sincerity with which he is his writing. I think the lyric here is pretty scattershot. It feels like it starts with a sort of relatively sort of philosophical treatise and then just starts to wander a bit about halfway through. It's definitely a song I think where the music is considerably in excess of the lyric. I don't think the lyric is bad, but it does feel like it just strays a bit. Is that too strong, do you think?
I like "You Don't Get Time to Hang a Sign on Me."
Yeah, that's
I
a
think
lovely
that's
little
that
phrase. That's a very nice lyrical little
absolutely.
phrase.
But then, then when we get to the second verse, fine, yeah, life's short, can't be bought. What you've got means such a lot to me, like it. And then by the time we get to the third verse, we then get all right. Okay, so you couldn't think of another nice thing to say about Patty here. So, there's people standing around who'll screw you in the ground. They'll fill you in with all their sins. You'll see. Like, okay, we're back to "Don't Bother Me, George," really here, aren't we? As whilst it's fine, it just doesn't sort of fit in with everything else. Especially, it's the meat between the sandwich of "make love all day long, make love singing songs, and I'll make love to you if you want me to." You sort of think maybe the making love wasn't going for you quite so well, George, at that point. That
Listen, it happens to all men sometimes. It's fine. He's doing his best. But yeah, I mean, you're not wrong.
we could also then go with the subconscious association of "make love all day long." There are people standing around who will screw you in the ground, and I'll make love to you if you want me to. But I'm not sure that "screw" was used in quite that way in 1966.
Even if it was, I'm pretty sure that wasn't the intention of the song. But yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, I really like that expression. There's people standing around to screw you in the ground. That's the, again, I like that couplet, but it just feels like it's slightly got away from him, if you know what I mean. I mean, even, the sentiment might be sort of "don't bother me," but lyrically, it's much more advanced. It's much more sophisticated than anything in "Don't Bother Me." It's a nice phrase. It's just not quite. I don't know. Like, I suppose if you were feeling generous, you could argue that it's more of the sort of philosophical kind of, each day just goes so fast, I turn around, it's past. Like, you know, time is getting away from you. These people are wasting your time. Don't waste time with them. Enjoy yourself. Make love. Blah blah blah. All that. So if you wanted to stretch a point, but I think that's a bit of an overread if I'm being honest.
I do find as well quite charming the focus on consent in the at the end as well. That "I'll make love to you if you want me to." You know, there's no actual pressure here, but it's if you want me to, which is quite nice. That is a sort of a step away from some of the elements of "oh, you've ruined my life. My life is nothing without you." It's a case of, look, we can do this, but you know what? Don't have to. It's up to you. And that was the point at which listening to that again reminded me of um, one of New Zealand's finest combos, the Flight of the Conchords, and one of their songs, "If You're Into It," which starts along those lines and then gets kind of weird later on, but in a funny way. It starts, "If you want me to, I can hang around with you. If I only knew that's what you're into." And that's the premise of the song, where he says, look, we can do this if you're into it. And then a little bit later on, it does get slightly weird. So, and then maybe later we'll get "hot by the refrigerator in the kitchen next to the pantry. You think that might be what you fancy," and stuff like that. So and then stuff about bringing along a roommate as well, which is quite. But then now I know there's no connection here. I know this is just purely accidental. But the episode that's in is basically about how the band are splitting up because one of them has got a girlfriend that he's spending all of this time with. And the episode's called Yoko. I just
Well, I
thought,
can't see any relevance there.
there's a coincidence, pure coincidence. But I'd like to think that maybe at some point they'd sort of listened to some of those lyrics and thought, yeah, okay, well, we can do something with that. And interesting, actually, in the character of the girlfriend is called Coco. So it's not a huge transition then onto Yoko, but yeah, Flight of the Conchords are yeah yeah a personal favourite. Hey, maybe there's no link whatsoever, but
That would be a surprise indeed.
by the way,
um,
while we're talking about the lyrics, would this be a good time to mention the fact that we had some correspondent about some previous George lyrics?
yeah, we can certainly dive into that. Yes, we've kind of held back on this email because it's about Taxman, and it seemed logical to discuss an email about a George song when we're discussing a George song. So that's the logic behind that. It's from friend of the podcast Ken, who has a few comments on Taxman. What he has said is, this is probably my favorite album of all time, and I could write to you every week about each song and tell you why I love it. That said, I must write about Taxman. I was about 10 when I first played this record. I knew absolutely nothing about taxes, so unfortunately the lyrics were beyond my level of comprehension. But from the very start, the eerie countdown and the choppy sound of the rhythm guitar driving each alternate beat, I was in awe and listening eyes wide, mouth open. Perhaps what Tommy Walker looked like after a session with the Acid Queen? What is this new sound? I don't think I've ever heard anything yet from anyone. Did we? Sure, the Kinks had already given us a heavy sounding guitar, rhythm guitar chords, and maybe pop songs like Hang On Sloopy, Lies, 19th Nervous Breakdown, etc. Got some lead lines that came close, but not like this. The Beatles themselves may have given some foreshadowing on Rubber Soul with Drive My Car and Think for Yourself, and overall, The Sound of Rain. The lead guitar was incredible to me. Paul Wright? Yes, it was indeed Paul. And when it mimics the bass line at 1.5 minutes, wow. Then those backing vocals that actually precede George in a way they lay out the conditions and George's response with what the taxman will take from us. I'm speechless. At the time, I had no clue who Wilson and Heath were, but it didn't matter to me. Learning they were real so many years later further impressed me with how brave and honest George was being at calling them out by name. I have to stop now. I could go on forever, and I wish these next 28 weeks were... Yeah, we could too. I wish these next 28 weeks were over, so I would already have heard all your insights onto every song in this LP. From Ken. So thank you very much, Ken. That's very much appreciated.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have nothing to add. That's particularly erudite and another welcome contribution. Thank you.
Yeah, very
Thank
much
you.
agreed. Yeah.
And it would be interesting then to know then
Yeah, yeah,
as a
absolutely.
young person to how I think about the lyrics now. That doesn't remove the the power of it. And I suspect that with Love You Too, um, I was probably a lot more focused on the musical side of it than the lyrical side of it when I first listened to it. So now going back in and going, okay, right, so this is particularly again distinct and different in the way that perhaps Taxman was for Ken. Um, it was just a real kind of powerful, but also probably slightly jarring thing as well. So I didn't really pay much attention to the lyrics. Now I can go back in and go, George, that's quite good. George, not sure about that, but then that's all part of it, and I think it's all part of also the fact that your point is that quite often this song is overlooked when people are writing about George's music and his Indian influence. Um, for example, in the Martin Scorsese documentary, um, I believe I haven't watched it, but living in the material world, reading something about it that suggested that perhaps they focus an awful lot more on Within You, Without You than they do on Love You Too, which I can kind of understand. But surely you want to go into the first, because without the first, you then don't get the arguably more complete contribution. And also, then, and I'm going to reference possibly one of the worst books I've read this year. Um,
It's only the 3rd of January.
oh, sorry, one of the worst books that I read last year, and yeah, and bought in a secondhand shop. And frankly, I was ripped off. Dark Horse by Jeffrey Giuliano, who apparently knows more about George Harrison's life than George Harrison does, who does not reference the song himself. He only references what Scott Wheeler and his family from New England thought about it. Now, Scott Wheeler was just a fan who came over to Liverpool, and apparently in 1966, when they met George's family, they made us lunch, then played us a freshly arrived acetate of George's still unreleased sitar opus, Love You Too, spelt with two O's, brackets originally entitled Granny Smith, on a deluxe stereo system George had perfectly selected. I will never forget watching Louise joyously dancing around the room to the thunderous strains of George's sitar music, while Harry looked on admiringly. That's nice. That's the only reference to that. And this is what I find such a odd book, is just how little there is about the music.
It's a terrible book. I have a copy here which I bought, I think, roughly when it was released, which is sort of the end of the 80s, early 90s. And I don't think I've picked it up since, because I remember reading it and thinking, this is terrible. So it's very reassuring that you've now reread it and I don't have to.
This guy apparently wrote for Rolling Stone.
That's not an indicator of anything. I read that Philip Norman George Harrison biography, and it's complete garbage as well. So it's not,
Yeah.
Philip Norman. I mean, that's a name to reckon with. But is George Harrison biography rather is just terrible. It's really, really bad.
The most interesting part of this book was actually an interview that was printed in the appendix from Toronto press conference when talking about Cloud9. And I think this is a relevant point that George makes when he was asked about whether he was underused during the Beatles years, and yeah, possibly, blah blah blah, so on and so forth. Um, but he says that maybe he's more able to express his views now. Maybe people are more interested in what I have to say. So where it gets interesting, because in the 60s and the early 70s, they thought I was a bit of a loony. No, sorry, let me rephrase that. Let's get it right. In the early 70s, they thought I was a loony because I just went to India, did all that bit. And that's actually, I think, quite perceptive, that he probably would have been seen in that light by quite a few people, especially because Indian culture was not that big a thing. There would have been a lot of suspicion, and there would have been quite a lot of racist attitudes from people in Britain, and a lot of, I think, suspicion about things that were new to them. And quite often their idea of things around Indian culture were things like the Peter Sellers "Goodness Gracious Me" in 1960, which, fair enough, it may not have been made with any particularly intentions, but was not necessarily the greatest representation of well, Peter Sellers playing an Indian doctor. Whatever you may feel about that, it was not a good idea even then. Just like Leo McKern in Help
Well, yes,
was not a
quite.
good idea even then. But it was different. It was new. I can understand why he would have felt like people would have treated him differently because of his genuine interest in those various things. Um, but there you go. Got away from the point now. Not sure what the point was. I think the point was that people don't appreciate this song as much as they should. How about that?
That is a good point to make, and I think well made. Yes,
Hugh
absolutely.
MacDonald.
Yeah. McDonald can go fuck himself in this song. I think it's really clear, sort of going back over some of the stuff that McDonald has written, that he just basically doesn't like George. He will occasionally grudgingly admit when George does something that he likes, like Long, Long, Long. I think he's quite complimentary about. But as a general rule, he just doesn't really like George Harrison songs. And he's very the little that he does write, I think it's like half a page. It's basically nothing. The little he does write about this song is really kind of patronizing and dismissive in a way that just feels wholly unjustified. Even, I mean, even back then, and when was it, 96 when Revolution in the Head was published? Like, even back then, is that, or whenever it was, that sort of first wave of sort of Beatles critical reappraisal, that felt, I remember reading that and being a bit pissed off by it because it just felt so unnecessarily dismissive. Not that George Harrison needs me to leap to his defense, of all people, but still, I've always really liked this song. I love the skirling vocals. I love the way that it sounds. I love the change of tone and texture that it brings to the album and the development, all of it. And to see it kind of just sort of patronizingly dismissed by Mick Donald in this way has always really rubbed me up the wrong way. So yeah, on this occasion, he can very much go fuck himself.
There is a drone element to it.
Oh sure, sure, absolutely.
It's a
But there's a drone
stylistic
element
thing.
to Tomorrow Never Knows as well, and it is not dismissed in the same way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, no, no. I'm not defending MacDonald here at all. But actually, I think he's right to point out that there is something a bit gloomy about the vocal performance. He's right to point out that the melody isn't exactly the most sparkling you could possibly be. However, the point that I think he misses is the effectiveness of those. And I think if you'd had a greater level of melody to it, then it would have taken away from, you know, the power of what he was trying to achieve. So I think I not trying to say that well, no, I don't agree with Harrison. I don't agree with MacDonald. But on the other hand, there's elements of coming to the right answer for the wrong reason about what he does. I think he's completely missed the point of the way why the song is the way it is. I mean, the singing isn't brilliant on it. It is quite nasally, but it is flat. But I think that was the intention that he was probably going for. You know, it's a couple of years' time, George will be a much, 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 much better singer. Great. But you don't need to be on this. You just need to get the point across. Not really sure again what the point I'm making there is, other than McDonald's both right and wrong, but mostly wrong.
Good. Point well made. I
No,
mean,
no,
yes.
it,
I
it
mean,
wasn't.
all right. Point made.
That made, yeah,
Okay, that's fine.
kind of,
Let's go with that then.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind the vocals in this. Like I said, I kind of like the sort of skirling sort of vocal that he does, which I think is really effective. But then that kind of melody, that side of the melody, is then kind of carried forward more on the sitar than it is in the vocal. And I think that's another thing that he kind of misses a little bit, is that the melody kind of weaves between what some of the vocal is doing and what some of the instrumentation is doing. And so more of that melody line is being carried by the guitar line, by the sitar line. And that's a really effective little interplay as well. And again, it's a kind of level of sophistication that we've really not seen from George up to this point. Like Taxman's got a great vocal and it's got a really well put, it's an incredibly well produced song, but it doesn't have that kind of interweaving in the same way that Love You Too does.
The leap from Don't Bother Me to this, and within that time frame, feels much greater than the leap from, I don't know, let's pick a really early Lennon McCartney song, I don't know, One After 909, through to even, I think, Tomorrow Never Knows. The
Hmm.
time frame is wider, and yes, the loops and the technological advances, but I think there's more of a leap in George's, especially bearing in mind the number of songs he has actually written. I don't necessarily think there are that many that were kind of discarded at this point. Either it's a case of, well, I've got a song, right, I'm going to present it. John and Paul have probably written 100 songs between them up to this point, some of which, of course, got then foisted onto other people as work songs, some of which will be discarded and come back to later, some of which never see the light of day at all. And then an awful lot appear on the albums and the B-sides and the singles. So they are making their mistakes in public, And it's quite easy then to perhaps dismiss George because he has so few songs that are put out there. But what are we? You know, 8, 9, 10 songs into his songwriting career, and we've got here phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
Yep, couldn't agree more. It's an astonishing leap for anyone, but for it to have happened in such a few number of songs is truly remarkable. And you know, this is how can I say this is the beginning of the journey, not the end of it. In fact, like you mentioned, there aren't that many songs that George kind of does going forward, and there is like definitely a point where he clearly stops. He stops doing his kind of Indian songs. And I can't think of what the source of this is off the top of my head, but I believe he was quoted somewhere saying, you know, I've been working at this for you know, like 4 or 5 years, and I'm barely a beginner. I'm never going to be a master at this, so maybe it's time to kind of move on. And I cannot for the life of me remember what the source of it is, but if I remember for the next episode, which I definitely won't, I will try and find it.
Have you ever listened to Wonderwall music?
Yes, I have.
Is that did that end up being the output for his Indian music rather than because you would have thought that the White Album would have been perfect to have kind of followed through that progression, especially bearing in mind it comes after Rishikesh as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But there's no influence there whatsoever. Yeah, right, I'll stand by that. But there you have Wonderwall music instead. So I'm just wondering if there was some sort of link there. But I've only just thought of that link, so it's a bit unfair to put you on the spot, and maybe that's something to come back to when we talk about within you or without you.
I think, well, yeah, I think it's something to come back to. I'll need to have a think about that. It is worth mentioning, you know, like The Inner Light is 1968, so that's, you know, the same year
Mm.
as the White Album. But I don't know the recording and release dates in terms of the White Album, Wonderwall Music, and Lady Madonna Inner Light. So I'd need to look into that. I don't know them off the top of my head. It's certainly possible, but it's certainly 1968 where that just like stops
At least publicly.
publicly. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. So this strikes me as being basically uncoverable.
Um, I mean, you'd think, and yet there are cover versions, none of which appear to be particularly good or interesting, unfortunately. Perhaps inevitably there's a corner shop cover version of it, which is relatively straight down the line. It's okay. It's got a nice kind of bass in it. But there's a really weird effect on Tadinder Singh's voice, which I do not like and does not work for the song. And I don't understand why they have done that. It's a really odd choice. So that's not great. And unlike their genuinely excellent cover of Norwegian Wood, their cover of Love You Too is in English, and it might have been interesting to not hear it in English. But it's a pretty straight down the line cover version. It's not that great. There's the Jim James version, which is all right. It's not, yeah. I couldn't really find anything that was particularly interesting when it came to cover versions, but they do exist. It's not uncoverable.
People being unable to get away from the original version.
Very much so. On my limited listens to the cover versions that are out there, yeah, they all seem to be pretty straight down the line. There's not a lot of variation or variety.
So there's nothing worth diving into then.
I would love to say yes, but no.
Certainly not that many listed on secondhand songs, which I suppose is not a major surprise. It's then a case of do I go for Bong Water, Bozo Allegro, Solid Gold, One Man Bannister, um, yeah, or Beat Pest.
Yeah,
Yes, you heard that
it's
correctly.
it's not an extensive list, is it?
No, and yeah, no, yeah, no, yeah. I don't think I'm going to be picking up any of those at any point. Yeah, no, it just doesn't seem like, yeah, no. Stick to the original.
Yeah.
Stick to the original. Yeah, that's fine. I'm just waffling now. How about you?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much done. Shall we draw this to a close?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, this will be interesting. What are you going to give it?
I'm going to give George, I think, his first 8. of
Eight.
this particular. Yeah, I just love the energy, and I think the energy, the change of rhythm in it, the introduction and the way it builds to that kind of burst, is just absolutely fantastic. And I cannot imagine Revolver without this, and I cannot therefore imagine the Beatles without this. And to say that for about a George song, I suppose the second George song on the album, is to say high praise indeed. It's not high praise. It's praise.
It's
It's
praise.
praise.
For
Yeah.
what it's worth, you did give Taxman an 8 as well. So this is
Oh
George's
well,
second 8.
second eight. Well, there you go. He's averaging 8 on the album. Let's see
He's
if he keeps that up.
Well, that will be something to yes look forward to. I'm also going to give this an 8, and for basically exactly the same reasons you've given. It's great that yeah those opening 30 seconds are really amazing. The energy on the outro as well, and the fade is really something.
Yeah.
It's a really big step forward for both George and for the band in general. It's culturally important. It's just a great song. I really really admire this. So yeah, I'm going for an 8 as well.
It's very difficult on this album because there are an awful lot of 8 out of 10 songs on here. Yeah, I don't think there's too much argument. You're not going to get any sixes on here, and down to them personal taste. You might go, oh well, I prefer that a little bit more than that one, but is it so much as then to knock off a mark, or where are the nines and the tens? It's an interesting one. It's just consistently flipping marvelous, but I'm
Yeah.
still then retaining a little bit of headroom for the absolutely stupendously amazing bits that are still to come, some of which may be on this album.
Well, we shall look forward to discovering that together, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Whatevs,
Excellent.
man, innit?
Good. All right, lovely. Well, I think we can probably leave things there. As always, you can really get a hold of us. You can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com, and we always appreciate hearing from you when you write, so please do so. We are also on the Flaming Remains of Twitter at Beatles_ology, and we're Beatles Stuffology on Instagram. You can also find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot, where I write about books and music and games and just anything that takes my fancy, really. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you are using so that more people can find the show. Next episode, we will be turning to Mr. McCartney, who is here, there, and everywhere. And as always, we hope you're going to join us for it. But until then, keep listening.